Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this third session, this third information sharing session on community safety and security. Kobus has sent his apologies and unfortunately he's got other commitments, and I will be driving this session for tonight. Just before we start, let us just make sure that we have put all our mics on mute, and for the whole session, please. And then also take note that we will be recording the session and that we will make it available hopefully through the course of tomorrow. We will send you out the links. You are welcome then to also share that links with any friends and family or relatives that you would like to. Also, as you know, that tonight we are privileged to be joined by Mr. Brett McNamara, the CEO of Agri Eastern Cape. We're very excited as he will be sharing some very interesting research statistics from work done by Agri Eastern Cape, as well as share with us some very useful guidelines and insights from the research work, specifically on how to keep our farming community safe and protected. Just before we maybe start with and introduce Mr. McNamara officially, let us quickly recap on what we have covered the last 3 weeks, specifically maybe for those of you that are joining for the first time. And as you know, that the purpose of community security is really just to upgrade the general alertness and readiness and preparedness of our communities, so that law-abiding citizens can actually be in a position to actively respond to any criminality, and at the same time that we actually disallow or restrict criminals the freedom of movement to carry out their acts against law-abiding citizens, and in very much cases, in many cases, on vulnerable rural communities and farms. So the aim of this community security program is therefore really to prevent and discourage criminal incidents and reduce it as far as possible. Contain it, and contain also, if it happened, that criminal incident, to contain it in the area, and then hopefully be able to apprehend criminals during that or shortly after such an incident, in relation and cooperation and liaison with SAPS. And then, very important, I think that's one area that we really realized the last couple of months is to render support to the affected victims after any criminal incident. So often after the action is finished and everybody goes home, then we sometimes forget that there are really vulnerable and traumatized people staying behind. And that's an area that we feel that we really need to take hands and actually build out. In our program, we call it the Community Care Program. And as weeks go by, we will maybe share a bit more on that and how you can actually get involved in that. Then, as I said, I mean, tonight's our third session. Very quickly, there's quite a number of topics that we would like to address over the next couple of weeks. So far, if you look at the slide, those areas in green, the previous 2 sessions, we've dealt with threats against farms, residents, and families. We looked at 1 or 2 of those sessions also to the warning signs of the imminent house or attack or farm attack. How to, in other words, be prepared and alert to see the signs and be ready before something happens. And then we also looked, I think, in the last session on what preventative measures can we take and implement on our own homes, in our farms, and also even in our businesses, to prevent and to restrict the movement and the opportunities of criminals. That in short is what we've done so far and where we are moving. Tonight, and I'm just going to stop sharing now. Tonight we are privileged to actually learn from one of the experts and people that are actively for the last couple of years, 20+ years, are actively involved in organized fashion, and that's Agri Eastern Cape. And we're fortunate to hear from Brett McNamara on what the work they have done and share with us more so their insights from what they've learned in their research work and their interaction from organized agriculture side. I'm going to share with you now that session with him, and then maybe afterwards we can maybe share a bit of discussion around it.
Good evening, Cobus and members of the Buffalo City Metro Community Security Unit and any other interested rural residents that are listening or would like to listen to this presentation. Thanks for the opportunity to address you. You requested, Cobus, that I chat to your members with regards to the threat facing the rural communities, what has led to this threat, and where are we heading. And then towards the end, I'm just going to touch briefly upon what I believe are individual responsibilities of rural dwellers to ensure that they make themselves as little of a target as possible to the criminal element. I'm going to do this by means of a slide presentation, and I will talk to the slides. And I think once you've seen the facts that I'm going to put on the table, you will understand that this is a matter that is going to require the concerted effort of rural dwellers to make sure that they do not present themselves as an easy target to the criminal element. So I'm just going to now share the screen, and I will talk to the various slides that are going to be put up. All right, I think I'm going to start off by sketching the scenario as it stands, and I'm going to present statistics from the official police report on the first quarter crime statistics for 2021-2022, that is April to June, and how this compares to previous years. And I think we will see that in spite of COVID and in spite of curfews being put in place, the crime situation within South Africa is in actual fact worsening. If we look at South Africa, and I think this is a disturbing trend, and if you follow my cursor, if we look at murder in the first quarter, April 2021 through to June 2021, compared to the same period last year, there's been a 66.2% increase in the murder rate. And if we look at all the serious crimes, the figure I'm highlighting now with my cursor is 60.6%. If we take the sexual offences in terms of rape, sexual assault, there has shown an increase of 74.1% year on year at this particular stage. If we take this number and we look at it as the ratio per 100,000 of the population, again, we will see that if we look at the murder rate in the end column, 9.5 people out of 100,000 have been murdered. And if we look at the rape situation, 16.6 per 100,000. And if we look at common assault and assault with the intent to inflict grievous bodily harm, that has increased from 37.2% to 62.2%, and from 43.8% to 65.3%. I think we will all agree that these are really disturbing numbers. Let's focus a little bit on the Eastern Cape, and I think bringing it back to the rural communities. And the first column is the Eastern Cape statistics. And I think something that I'd like to point out here, which we flagged as a potential threat. If we look at the crimes that have occurred at residences of the perpetrator or the victim, in the Eastern Cape for this quarter, we had 202. Compare that to your public places, in other words, streets, open fields, beaches, parking areas, it's 230. So if we look at the ratio between these two statistics, almost half of the instances of murder in actual fact took place at the residences of the victim or at the residences of the perpetrator. If we compare that, for example, to Gauteng, we will see it was only a third. even KwaZulu-Natal, it was a lot less. So I think this is a disturbing trend. If we look at the Eastern Cape and the Free State, that a lot of these murders are in actual fact taking place at the residences. If we take it, we drill down further to attacks on farms and smallholdings, and again, if you follow my cursor and we'll go to the Eastern Cape statistics, if we look at the 2020-2021 quarter, we had 10 incidences of murder. And then if we then take that number, we look at the 2021-2022, in other words, the first quarter, financial quarter for the police of this year, it was 16. It doesn't look like a big number, but if we look at it, that is almost a 60% increase on attacks on farms and smallholdings within the Eastern Cape. Let's just have a look a little bit further at other crime statistics that I think are important. And again, where it is highlighted in the column, obviously this is relevant only to the Eastern Cape, where it is the pink color that has shown an increase, and where there is a green color, it's shown a significant decrease. And I think the statistics to take home here is if we look at crime detected as a result of police action, where we've seen a significant decrease. And if we look at that number, on driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs, we've seen a decrease of 250%. Now that can be attributed most definitely to the curfews that were put in place with regards to the COVID restrictions. So crime detected as a result of police action, although we are seeing a significant decrease or increase in crime detected or significant successes there, I think this is primarily related to the COVID restrictions, whereas all the other instances of crime have in actual fact shown an increase. If we go back to the serious ones again, we look at a 63.7% increase in the Eastern Cape, which compares to the national average of 66%. And again, if we look at sexual offences, 77.6%, which indicates that the Eastern Cape, as a crime-ridden province, is most certainly in the top half of our provinces nationally. These instances do not take into account stock theft. If we look at the stock theft cases, and unfortunately I must concede at this point that there is probably woeful underreporting in many cases, as isolated instances of ones and twos are often not reported by farmers due to the time and effort they have to put in with regards to reporting these cases, and then also appearing in court when suspects have been caught. But I think this is still a disturbing statistic. And this is obviously relating not to the quarter. These statistics we got from the National Stock Theft Forum, and these relate to the 2019-2020 financial year and to the 2020 to 2021 financial year. And we can see in the Eastern Cape, we had almost 12,000 cattle stolen, 48,000 sheep, and just over 10,000 goats. And if we look at the amount of animals that are going to be recovered, it's an absolute fraction of what was in actual fact stolen. And as I say, I think we could conservatively double these numbers, bearing in mind that often stock theft is a precursor to a farm attack or an attack on a person responding to, for example, collars that have gone off, or to reports of stock theft in progress. And I think stock theft, the increase in stock theft often bears a very strong correlation to farm attacks. Why are we seeing such an increase? I'm going to stop briefly on this slide, which talks to the unemployment level. And here are the official statistics from the second quarter of 2021. We're currently sitting with 34.4% of our population is unemployed. If we look at it, it's 7.8 million people in South Africa do not have jobs. Yeah. And if we look at their education levels, and I often think this bears a strong correlation to the types of crimes committed and the veracity or the savageness with some of these crimes that are committed. 51% of these unemployed persons do not have a matric. 38% have a matric, and tertiary and graduates make up about 10%. So I think coupled with the unemployment levels, which continue to increase year on year, we're also sitting with a situation where more than half of these unemployed people are probably in reality unemployable. And how do these people survive? So I think if we look at the current state of the education within South Africa, this is most certainly not something that's going to be turned around quickly. And I think the way that we are seeing the economy moving, this unemployment figure is only going to increase. And as a result of that, I believe has a significant increase in the amount of crime. So once we've sketched the situation with regards to what we are facing, and if I have to say that in my personal view, the threat against rural dwellers and rural communities is only going to increase. Let us look at the response from SAPS. Now, the slides I'm going to show you now were taken in KwaZulu-Natal after the unrest that happened there earlier this year. And it was a survey that was done by Kunalu, our provincial counterparts in that province. And they surveyed approximately 100 farmers associations and communities within that area. And although this was relating to the unrest, I think we can draw a very strong parallel between the response of the police there and the response that they would normally be able to give in any situation with regards to a farm attack. Either they have the resources or they do not have the resources. And if we look at the situation there, they've said that approximately a quarter of SAPs in the province have been actively deployed and can protect the area. A quarter say there has been virtually no deployment or they're not visible. And in half the cases, they say, yes, SAPs are visible, but they are under-resourced. This is probably a little bit skewed because it was relating to large-scale unrest. But I think the most disturbing factor here is that in a quarter of the rural communities, there was no police presence whatsoever. Do SAPs have sufficient capacity to deal with the threats? Again, bearing in mind this was the threat of large-scale unrest. And this number is possibly a little bit skewed, but I think we can see that in more than 97 responses, they said no, they did not have sufficient capacity. And I think although they might have some capacity to deal with individual farm attacks going forward, this is certainly a disturbing number. Where in actual fact, where they're saying approximately only 13 or 14% of the police stations in actual fact had sufficient capacity. Private security companies, and I think this is, we saw in KwaZulu-Natal, the private security companies stepped up, and those of you who have looked at the statistics on the private security industry in South Africa currently has more people in its employ than the South African Police Services and the SANDF combined. So they are definitely a very, very key role player. And there we will see that 96 out of 110 respondents indicated that they had some type of formal arrangement with private security companies. And I think this is something that rural dwellers are going to be relying on more heavily going forward. Community watch groups, and I think this is the one slide which was encouraging for us, was that out of 109 respondents, 106 of these communities in actual fact had community watch groups. And this is obviously our first line of defense. So I unfortunately do not think in the Eastern Cape we can boast of this number, but it is certainly something that we're all working on. And Kobus, at this stage, congratulations to you and your initiative that you've got going in your area. I think you most definitely will be making a significant difference. Let us have a look again at what is the responsibility of the individual with regards to rural safety and mitigating against criminal attacks. And I'm going to break this down very briefly, and often this is repeated in just about every single presentation, but I think it's important that we keep going back to these basics. I believe there are in essence 5 elements to to any criminal attack. And these need to be addressed by an individual. These are not things that can be done or measures that can be put in place by any community group or any outside party. Yes, they can provide assistance on this, and they can provide resources, but ultimately on all of these aspects that I'm going to deal with now briefly, it's important that the individual person, the individual family does what is required to make sure that they make it as hard as possible for criminal attacks to take place. And I'm going to divide it into these 5: opportunity, early warning, assistance activation, barriers to entry and access, and response. When I talk about opportunity, I think this is probably the most basic and fundamental level. And we have seen this present itself in just about every single farm attack that we've analyzed over the last 20 years. So I speak from experience to say that when we look at these things, these elements are all there, depending on what precautions the individual had in place, often determine the outcome. So when we talk about opportunity, this is the opportunity that you, in actual fact, give the criminal to attack you, to rob you, or to do whatever they want to do in that particular circumstance. And the main aim of what you should be doing as an individual farmer or rural dweller is to reduce the opportunity to the criminal. And there are 4 key aspects. The first one is visual. When I talk about the visual aspect, that is the point: is where is your property? Is it easily visible from a road? Do you close your curtains at night? Do you have security lights? Can they see what you are doing? Can they observe you from a concealed place? And in a lot of the instances where people have limited the visual access that the criminal element has, often the criminal element will go to a place where they can access it visually in an easier manner. Access control. Do you have gates? Do you make sure that they can't just walk onto your property? Do you have some measure of seeing whether people have come onto your property? Have you got warning signs up? Do you indicate armed response? Do you indicate alarms? Do you indicate dogs? In other words, are you portraying a message out to the criminal element? Don't come here, I am ready. And I think that is the part. My apologies for the spelling on the last word. It's supposed to be deterrence. And again, what are you showing out there to deter the criminal element? Have you got electric fence warning signs up? Have you got signs of vicious dogs on the property? Have you got signs that you're part of a farm watch? Have you got signs up that you're linked to a security company, etc., etc.? These are all aspects that individuals can take to make sure that they deny or at least create the impression that there is no opportunity here for the criminal element. Early warning. Kobus spoke in his previous talk about making sure we don't let our guard down. There are various things that one can do to make sure that you get a potential early warning to any impending attack. Dogs are a key aspect. Access control. When you arrive home, is the gate left open? Has the lock been broken? Is someone inside? Have you got cameras? Cameras nowadays are becoming the buzzword. There are analytical cameras. There's AccuSense cameras on the market that can trigger for movement, that can send you an alert and warn you that something is coming, where you can stay within your house and actually see what's happening outside without having to expose yourself. Situational awareness. Ladies and gentlemen, we all need to be aware that we are all potential targets. And you need to be aware of what's happening around you, and you need to make sure that when you start feeling uncomfortable, act on that instinct. Don't blunder into situations just because you are too scared to ask for assistance or to go and ask a neighbor to accompany because you're not feeling comfortable. As human beings, we have an inherent ability to often sense when we are walking into a situation if we have heightened our situational awareness, and this is important. Assistance activation. There are going to be cases where you're going to get to a situation where, in spite of what you've done in the first two aspects of rural safety, that a criminal attack is underway and you're going to require assistance. And here we have seen this is probably the biggest failing in many farm attacks, where there is only a single method of activating for assistance. There are various methods. There's cell phones, there's radios, there's panic buttons, there's hardwire panics to alarms, there's safe monitoring. We've seen that every farm attack, they always want to open the safe. So it's often a good idea, and Cobus mentioned it, that you're at home watching TV, your burglar alarm is not activated, but it's often a good idea to put a silent alarm on your safe, and your safe should always be activated, always, because that is the one that's going to trigger. You can give in, you can show them, you can take the keys, open your safe, and what you need then is a silent alarm going off to warn people that there's been an unauthorized safe opening so that assistance can be activated. We've seen in a number of farm attacks, people are relying far too much on cell phones. The first thing the criminal element goes after is they confiscate your cell phones. You need a multi-layered approach. You need different mechanisms to be able to raise the alarm if your cell phones have been taken. Radios are becoming increasingly important. We also notice in KwaZulu-Natal that once cell phone towers have gone down, the system gets overloaded and that cell phones don't work. So please have a look at various methods, and I would say every single member needs to have at least 3 different methods of activating assistance. Barriers to entry or access. Once an attack has taken place, do you have a secure area? Do you have security fences that you can get behind, that you can slow the attackers down? Have you got burglar bars and gates on your houses? Have you got a safe room identified that you can raise the alarm and get into and wait for help to arrive? Is there a situation where you can mobilize various deterrents, such as an electric fence, or alternatively some method that can prevent people from, or slowing them down from actually getting to you as a person while you wait for response? And then again, with regards to response, we all put structures in place. There are response teams in place, but do you as an individual, have you made it easier or easy for them to assist you? Personal trackers, devices can be bought now, which are quite reasonable, even that you can carry on you, so that people can, just like a vehicle tracker, can see where you are, what have been done. People often rely on cell phones, and as I say, once the cell phone is gone and they've turned the cell phone off, it's no longer of any use. Have your vehicles got trackers in them? This is of huge assistance to your responders if they know that your vehicles have got trackers on. A simple thing like registration numbers. Is there a list, or have you logged with your response company the registration numbers of your vehicles? We've had a couple of farm attacks where it's been indicated that they've been hijacked, they've been taken, they've taken the vehicles, but everybody's in shock, and eventually we cannot get the registration numbers of the person's vehicles to utilize the rural road camera network to track these vehicles. And in one particular instance, we even had to get hold of the insurance company to get the registration numbers. Make it easier for your responders to assist you by providing this type of information. Again, medical response. Are you contracted to a medical aid? Do your responders know that you're contracted to a medical aid, so that you don't have to rely on the state medical services, that you can get a company like GuardMed or any one of the other private companies that can respond quickly to any sort of requirement. Your security response. It's imperative that there is some form of response to your particular attack by qualified personnel. So again, I would urge every single member to make sure that they are linked up in some form or other to a security company, that at least you know they're on their way and they can assist you. And then obviously, again, please make sure that your neighbors, they're often your first line of defense, that your neighbors are contactable through radios. They can be alerted through various apps, through panic buttons, so that they can assist you. In summary, and I think this was probably the most striking statistic that we've come up with once we've looked at the attacks over the past 20 years, and I can confidently say that in more than 80% of the cases of attacks in rural communities, the outcome could have been completely different if the individual farmers, individual rural dwellers and their families had in actual fact done some of their own responsibilities, done some of the things that is required of them to make sure that they present a far more difficult target. So please, I think in closing, Cobus, thanks for the opportunity to chat to you guys briefly. I think we can explore many of these aspects in greater detail, but most certainly the individual person, the individual families out there have a huge responsibility. I would say probably 90% of the responsibility is upon them to make sure that they do not present themselves as an easy target to the criminal element, which is only going to be increasing as the economic and unemployment situation worsen within our country. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think it was quite an interesting session. I really think that you all could have learned quite a lot from it. I enjoyed it specifically as well. As I said earlier, that we will definitely share this link with you, because I think it's worthwhile sharing it with others as well, as wide as possible. Once again, thank you for joining tonight. We try to keep it short every week. We all are busy, and once the recording has stopped, we can maybe didn't say our goodbyes, but let me just first stop the recording, and then we can unmute and maybe just share a bit of thoughts and insights in what we have heard tonight. Thank you, and goodbye.